1, 2, 3,
What time
4.
is it?
One, two. 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2. You are listening to the Online Time Fame Podcast. I am your host, JD. Thank you for listening. Thank you for the support. Thank you, everyone. Let us just say this. Let us apologize in advance because, as we learn how to podcast and broadcast, we have to almost do what we got to do everything at one time and make sure the show is planned. We have heard people say, yeah, I just get on my show and I don't write nothing down and I just do the show off the top of the head. And there's some people who are great at doing that. But as far as bringing as much value as possible. Wait a minute. Let us tell you what this episode is called. This show is going to be called Genocide Identified. Yes, this is a part of the Charleston White long-range comedy game of Charleston White series. We made it into a series because Charleston White epitomized, he heightened, he brought attention to being intelligent but still being streetwise. So that's what he did. He has dropped math. He has showed us a blueprint. If you listen to Charleston White, he'll tell you do this, do that. When you do your social media, do this. He's giving out information and tips to help people. So when we say Charleston White, he says go ahead and make a reactionary video to me. He ain't really jumping on people and stopping them from saying who he is. So he's saying I'm gonna help y'all. So that's a quality that we should look for when we see people trying to rise, because you want those around you to rise as well. We ain't saying give away nothing free because he is a public figure, so he can be used in that way. He has put himself on platforms as a public individual, as a public figure, as an entity. So he has done that. But at the same time, his whole background, his whole origins is based on community service, is based on grassroots helping people. So, like I see an interview recently. 2 interviews are out that I ran up on. You just put it in a search engine, Charleston White, Google, and 2 interviews popped up that were like 2-hour interviews. But I heard some of what he was saying before, but it wasn't a big interview that had a lot of views, because when he's asked about like topics about people, what do you think about this? You were in Atlanta, so what do you think about this group? And what about these dudes? And when he names certain people, that's more attention grabbing than when he's breaking down like politics or something. Because as we mentioned, everything on this show right here, Genocide Identified. This is talking about when Charleston White was confronted in September of 2025 about comments he made about the murder of Charlie Kirk, the right-wing political activist or analyst or political pundit or however they would say it, the politician. When he was killed, Charleston White made comments like Charleston White does. He jokes around with stuff too. He says stuff about everybody, and that's just to gain attention. He does it for attention and for entertainment. That's what he does. It ain't personal. He said he don't hate people. He ain't against them. It's just part of the algorithm, and that's part of the entertainment nature of the internet. And that's what people have shown him that they wanted to hear. So that's some of what he does. He also has serious content. And as we said, the serious content wasn't always as popular. Now, because of him, now conscious or more aware, knowledgeable content is more respected because people have heard him be respectable. He started out that way, but once he found a balance between comedy, jokes, and seriousness, his popularity rose. So that's why we say this is the long-range game. It's really long-range game, but we say long-range comedy game of Charleston White, which is more acceptable to people as well, because this long range game, you're talking about streets. When you get into the streets, and that's that long range game, you especially talking about the South, because when you talk about the South and the game of the South, it's much different than the game in the North. The game is the game, but the South has a whole nother level of game, because most of our families, they come to the North from down South. There are some families that have been up North for a long time, but a lot of people could trace some of their families to the South. And, in order to come from the South to the North, one had to have to game to survive in the North. One had to have knowledge because everything is more subtle up north. And in the South, it was just what it was. There were some subtleties, but there was just some blatant things that were done and are still done in the South that are just Southern stamps, ways of life, what they would call customs and traditions. That's just how what they do is what they do. So Charleston White, by him having the long range comedy game, he demonstrated that he went from the digital realm into the comedy circuit and comedy clubs. That's why we say long range comedy, because he's going from coast to coast, from city to city, from state to state, doing stand-up, being supported at the street level by the people. Because not only is he doing jokes, he's also sharing information. So some of that information has to get transferred from us through what he has said, and then we point out the intricate nature of his conversation, which is game, which is knowledge. Game is something you can use to improve your life. See, people think game is when you running something or tricking somebody and lying to them. Game is improvement. How do you focus on the game, even if it were sports? What is the strategy? So game would be strategy. So the point is, when Charleston White was pressed about what he said, speaking on Charlie Kirk, the political figure, let's say it like that, the late political figure who was prominently rising in Republican or conservative politics, Charleston White spoke on him. He was chastised at the highest levels. If I'm correct, I didn't get the quote, but he may have been criticized even at the White House level. I don't remember the quote of who said what. I didn't get that quote when it was said, but it has been mentioned, it is floating around, that he was criticized at a very high level. So people have to remember, when Charleston White is criticized, we hear what we hear. We see what we see, meaning those of us who consume content through the internet or mainstream media. We always talk about mainstream media, traditional media being the main TV stations, NBC, CBS, and ABC. Those are the main core. There's like 4 now, but then you have radio and you have the main core of those. And then you have the core of cable television, MSNBC, like that. Charleston White is different because he came into the digital media, which is the newer media, and he came there and expanded, because most of the other media is controlled. It's dictated as to what will be done. The mainstream media, the traditional media, where digital media have more freedom. A lot of people have risen now to digital media thinking it's synonymous, thinking it's the same thing as new media, but it's also being bought, and major companies are investing in this digital platform media so they can have that grassroots to the ground street level feel, because people know that the corporate media, they tell us what they want us to hear, and that's just commonly known amongst most people, whereas it's assumed that digital media is someone who's talking straight from the muscle, straight from the street, straight from the horse's mouth. You're gonna get it, and that's how they think. But that's not how it is, because, as I said, big companies are coming in now. They're sponsoring. If you say right now from where you're listening, I think I'm going to do me a show. You could do a show at a basic level that would be current events. You could do a current event podcast show. Anyone who's listening right now, stick to the script, be consistent. Now, we don't know what's going to happen. All we know is I can invest 5 hours per week. Monday through Friday, I can have 5 hours of content made. I can cut out something else I do in my day. I'm very busy. Maybe I'm in my vehicle. Maybe I'm outside taping on my phone and I'm recording ahead of time. Maybe I'll do some brief edits. But with that amount of investment, I don't have no people who I can prove and say I have this and that. I don't have those numbers. But anyone who does that, from what we've all been told by those such as Charleston White, to be consistent, other intricacies of what have to be done and other techniques that have to be learned, and one does have to study. But what I'm saying is, it's going to make a difference. It's going to grow with consistency over some time. It's going to make some difference if some content quality is involved. Put some content quality, whatever, even if it's about weaving baskets and basket weaving, knitting, crocheting, sewing, whatever it may be. Do some research. So we just say we're apologizing right now for not having as much research for this episode as we want to, but we want to also acknowledge that people have been listening to the one episode with long range comedy game of Charleston White. We want to touch on something that Charleston White did in relation to Charlie Kirk. Pardon for taking so long to land that plane and bring it back around and get back on topic. But it was Charleston White who has said, hey, America, black people are not your enemy. See, so when Charleston White said that, That was in September of 2025. That was in response of what was brought to him, the energy that was directed his way after he made his Charlie Kirk comments. Everywhere you look, Charleston White canceled. Charleston White is in trouble. All of these. So sometimes people make these type of comments. They generate negative energy by instigating. And so, but things were said. Charleston White went above people's head when he said America. So that when you say America, what's synonymous with America? It ain't us. It ain't non-Caucasians. It's Caucasians. America. He could have said white America. That's a synonym for, because people don't give the credit of American descendants of slavery as being true people who are of the soil. Let us say it like that without even going further. So Charleston White said America. Black people ain't your problem. America. Chinese is your problem. America. Russia is your problem. America. You let too many different foreign groups in this country because now they're watching you, selling your secrets from within. America. That's what he said. So we may listen to that. We may say, what is Charleston White talking about? He's talking directly to people in position. Intelligent people in power positions heard exactly what he just said, alerting these people that he was intelligent enough to have dialogue and discourse with those who are considered intelligent. So-called black folk, what we got these people online who they don't say they're leaders because now the so-called conscious community has been discredited because certain individuals have been said to be con men or always collecting money and always getting donations and never having anything to show for what they got. That's a narrative that's been put out on certain people right now. So a lot of so-called smarter people say, oh, I ain't no leader, but they still speak in a leadership position. They still speak on the so-called condition of race and politics in America. They're still talking about it, but they say, oh, I ain't no leader, because they're afraid to get stepped to. They may have got slapped on the wrist. They want to get the monetary gain and they want to get the respect of being someone in a position to be heard, but they don't want to take the responsibility to really stand and say what's really going on. And that's the difference between them and Charleston White, because when Charleston White had been saying stuff, but when they try to put that pressure on, it's just like a sports game. It's just like basketball, football, or baseball. When that pitcher throws a certain pitch, he said, well, I know he don't like this pitch. They have scouting reports where they have people who study your film for an upcoming game. And then they tell the opponent, he don't like this pitch right here. So then I know, throw that pitch. And then a champion will rise to the occasion and he will make an adjustment in his game and say, they don't know I was working on that pitch. And even though I don't like it, I've been working and I knew they was probably going to try to use that on me. So he improves his game to meet what was brought. So when Charleston White met the opposition that was brought intellectually, see, it wasn't physical force. It wasn't violent. It was a psychological addressing that they addressed Charleston White with. It was a psychological response. Now, they did make comments. They did say things and they did take things from him. They did suspend accounts. They did pause his accounts. They did try stuff. But when he said, America, I'm not your enemy. Black people are not your enemy. China's your enemy. So it was almost hypocritical because of the amount of Chinese who are allowed to come into America and get more benefits, to get more respect than so-called black people. Because months ago, Charleston White had said, even with the hate bill after COVID, they put the word Asian. I didn't go back and read that. I do remember hearing stuff on the news. They did put the word Asian in hate crime bill. So Asians are protected because during COVID, supposedly Asians were being attacked for being Asians. In the USA, so-called American descendant of slavery, because it's not African at all, have been attacked since day one. Acknowledged and known. So when people try to retract and change history and take different acknowledgments out of certain so-called government buildings, these people's parents ain't even been in America that long. These people have been in America since 1900, just like everybody else who's an immigrant. So we ain't arguing about who's an immigrant, because even a lot of Caucasians are immigrants. The ones who say we and I are still immigrants. They ain't been here longer than American descendants of slavery. What we're saying is, when you go get a job and you tell a job, I want to do this and I want to do that, and they say, well, you can't do that right now because these other people have been here longer than you and they got seniority. You got to wait your turn. But these people come here, and when I say these people, I mean anyone who's trying to talk. And Charleston White reminded them, hold on, wait a minute. America, that's what he said. I'm not your enemy. Meaning you're going too serious at me, and I'm just me. I'm Charleston White. I'm not the top politician that you got to watch. I entertain. I'm online. I help my community. I've done work for people in the community. I've helped a lot of people. I ain't no problem like that. But if you want to make a problem in confronting me intellectually, you might lose. And that's what Charleston White did. That's why we say the long range comedy game, because it's really the long range game of Charleston White. See, you first watching this dude right here, and he just uses what they call shock jock tactics, like Howard Stern. One of the originators of shock jock radio was Howard Stern from the 1970s. You know, Howard Stern is a power broker, one of the most powerful people in media, because even 10 to 15 years ago, maybe it was 10 years ago, he first got a contract. He had been getting big money, but he got a new contract with, it was Sirius XM when they were separate. It used to be Sirius, and then there was some other company, and then they merged. Before that, he did a big deal for $500 million 5 years. So he was getting $100 million a year, reportedly. Not that but reportedly. And this was maybe 10 to 15 years ago, and that contract had been renewed at least twice. So my point is, everyone knew long before then that he had a book out. I think it was called Private Parts. Then I think they made a movie. So he was always the iconic figure of radio, what they call shock, because he would just speak real. Hey man, what's this? What's that? And he had a wide following for that. So he was respected. So the point is, that tradition was continued through other people, especially for Urban was different. There's a lot of them, and I mentioned them in another episode. Don Imus and Glenn Beck. There's a lot of figures, in Rush Limbaugh. There's a lot of voices that are powerful in talk radio, because it was talk radio. But now the gate had opened because it's digital media, and it's called podcasting. So that was a whole different realm, because that was back when it was only 5 positions. It was only 5 radio stations you could be on. There was only 10 to 15 slots where something like that could take place. Well, now it's thousands, it's tens of thousands of people who start shows. So when Charleston White used a tool to break through the whole crowd of people talking, he had knowledge already, but he told jokes. He's telling jokes. He's funny. You know, he was able to transition from digital media to comedy shows, because why? He gets suspended all the time. So when he had to stop people and say, hold on, America, I'm not your problem, his accounts had been getting shut down for years. So when he said, I'm not your problem, that made everyone be introspective, meaning they had to look within themselves. America had to look within themselves and stop saying, you, Charleston White, you're a bad person. You said something bad. He said, I didn't say nothing when I was talking about these other folk. When I said something about these Mexicans, when I said something about them, it's all jokes and fun, because that is a character. That is me entertaining. That is satire. That is sarcasm. That is a form of literature. That is a form of speech. That is a form of communication. See, when he brought it that way, because he is educated, he is intelligent, they stopped bothering him. But what I'm saying is, what he said surpassed everything that is being said on a national front. We listen to figures like Al Sharpton, Keeping It Real, Politics Nation. Who would have thought? I mean, those who know already know. Please read. Read as much as you can about whatever you like. Read for entertainment. Sometimes have fun, read some books, educate yourself, because that knowledge is going to carry you. It's going to help you in your communication skills when you have to talk to people. There may be a serious situation. I mentioned it before when Charleston White, also in the same broadcast, when he told Caucasians, America, black people are not your problem. He also said white people are ethnocentric. Meaning that means that one thinks their ethnicity or ethnic group is better than others. And then it goes further, and it's called Eurocentric, meaning one who thinks Europeans are better than others. So when Charleston White said ethnocentric, that's what white people are. They know what he's saying. Everybody else may pull out a dictionary. They may just say, I don't know what he's talking about. They ain't even worried about it. Yeah, it means something about they're bad. All right. They don't have to even know the definition. But by him knowing what he was saying, that's showing you that's another lane. That's another conversation that he can have, as extensive as necessary. Because, just because someone is white don't mean they're intelligent. So there's different classes of people within a group. So Charleston White is saying, no, we can have a deeper conversation. So when he said, I'm not your problem, China is your problem, and he went further when he was saying Russia is your problem, not me. If anyone's a problem, it ain't me. I've been here the long time. The whole time, so-called black people have always been around Caucasians. We have always had a certain relationship where we have shown unity. We didn't just revolt and we could have left he was saying we could have left the country a long time ago. Why do you leave something that you built? We have maybe a dysfunctional relationship with Caucasians, but we have one. This is a funny thing. Let's off topic for a split second, but on topic. When you go to this movie called The Help, The Help was about a Viola Davis, and she was a maid, and I think then they had that other movie, The Butler, with Forrest Whitaker a few years ago before that. But The Help was a huge book. But nowadays you see like a lot of immigrant people doing housework. But there was a time in early U.S. history where it was so-called Negroes obviously raising Caucasian families. They raised these Caucasians, people's grandparents. They were revered. These kids grew up, and they would see, and Charleston White talked about this, but anybody who watches old movies and knows history, we always took care of Caucasians in this country and looked out for their best interest and weren't the benefactors of reciprocal treatment. Let me say it like that. We didn't receive fair treatment systematically, legislatively, lawfully, as what we gave. And there's other reasons for that goes way different than we could talk about in the podcast, but you ain't gonna hear it on most of these people because they don't know. But they are in positions where they're pontificating about knowledge, and they're supposed to be a leader when they just talking. They might as well be talking about football or basketball, and they trying to talk about global affairs. So the point is this. Charleston White addressed the international community in a way we don't hear done. They don't hear that. Because we got people who talk and they keep saying white supremacy this, white supremacy that, and these Caucasians doing this. And we know that already. All right, we know that. We know what they do. We know some of them do. And we know that you're really one who keeps that conversation going without solutions. Because as we mentioned, there's 3 factors. Small minds talk about people. This has been said for years. Average minds talk about events. Great minds talk about ideas. And we added that they talk about ideas in the implementation, the application of ideas, meaning problem solving to with those ideas. That's the higher mind of thought. We don't want to talk about people. We could say this dude is out of pocket. That dude needs to stop wearing dresses because he's sending the wrong image. You could say that all day about people, and it would never stop. And those individuals you're talking about would be upset. Man, why you talking about me wearing them dresses, son? You know what I mean? What is the problem? I mean, the mirror is talking to you. You look at the mirror and see if you see a problem. It don't have nothing to do with me of you wearing a dress. Remember in the early 1800s, they would show babies and they would be boys and they would have dresses on. And that's some cultural stuff that Europeans used to do. Like just as I forget what it is. They teach that in history class. And I don't remember how they described what they did that for. But it was done. And anyway, so, but the point is this. So these individuals present themselves as their thought leader. Not as they don't want to call themselves a leader, but they present themselves as a thought leader. They have direction. They're like, yeah, these Caucasians are doing this and these white supremacists do that. All right, fine. All that could be valid. But if someone's been saying that for 3 years and between them selling a product to you, I'm selling this though, and get this. So they get the validation from saying what somebody is always doing. Like, no, I'm on your side and the race soldier Caucasians is doing this. That's how they're saying it. What do they call them in New York? They call them Roman soldiers. That's what they say. Yeah, man, these whatever. We know all these street terms and all this stuff that they do on the street. There's any city street you go to, they got some kind of way they say something. They call them 5-0, and they call them curly in Florida. There's just different ways. There's nothing new under the sun. So the point is this: when Charleston White took the level of knowledge to a higher plateau, so to speak, he said, listen, black people can go and talk to the United Nations. There's an open seat. The United Nations has declared America to be racist and uses an abuse of power through police brutality against black people. Now, that was published in around 2020. They had an article about that. It was international news, Associated Press, and different outlets covered that had been designated, and conservatives said, no, that's not true, and whatever. But my point is this: for Charleston White to bring that up, he took his conversation with Europeans from a national level to an international level. So most of these dudes, when they're saying national or international, they're not talking about from the global stage of neutrality, because the United Nations represents neutrality. So when Charleston White said the United Nations, he showed another level of comprehension that most of these people don't even talk about. They trying to put themselves in a leadership position, and they're saying they're teaching, no credentials. They ain't got no college credits, and that don't mean one is the smartest. It don't. But Charleston White mentions his college background. He mentions where he studied at. He mentions the legislation that he's worked on at the state, city, local level, how he's taught nationally. And we're talking about not taught in some, and this don't mean it's a bad thing, but not taught at the community center, not taught at some small institution, but at major institutions, at the state capitol level, legislation. Changing rules, changing so-called laws. That's what Charleston White was doing. We've seen it. So that's the background of where he was in. So no one's equaling him in that area that we see at this generation, at the so-called younger people, the people under 45, put it like that. These other dudes are talking and manipulating because that's just aggravating if one keeps saying the same thing. Yeah, white supremacy, white supremacy, white supremacy. We know that. What you gonna do? They ain't got no solution. That's why we said small, average, and great minds. They ain't got no solution. One ain't going to be a great mind from 200 years ago if they didn't do something compared back in that time to greatness. Now, we may see it 200 years later, and it's good. Oh, wow, yeah. Booker T. Washington said this. This one said that. All right. That, for us to still know who they are today, means they did something. Some of them were tokens. Some of it was symbolic. But what I'm saying is they were mentioned. These people now don't even care about mention. They just trying to stack bread. And I guess they call them ambulance chasers. They call them con men, unfortunately. So what I'm saying is when Charleston White mentioned the United Nations, that changed the conversation. When Caucasians say he's doing something wrong and speaking on a Caucasian, he took the whole conversation out of the house. It's no longer the house Negro conversation. This ain't the field Negro. This ain't the slave Negro. This ain't the house Negro. This is the international game. What was that song they made? International Player? Was that UGK? Underground Kings? Bun B and Pimp C? Was that International Player when they had the video when Pimp C had the mink on? So that's why we say when we talk, and that's what? That's Beaumont, right? Is that Beaumont? Is that Beaumont, Texas? Yeah. So, and then they're coming out of where? So that's Texas. So the point is, so when you talk international game, Charleston, who would have thought? Who would have thought? Although Texas is the biggest landmass state in the states, if I'm correct. So when you got it from Charleston White and we say long range comedy game, that's that long range, because ranges are what? See, the ranch range. See, that's that range out where they got the range, where they got the land. That's where, so when we say long range comedy game, Charleston White put it down on that level, because when he said what's going on with the United Nations, you went international, you went long range, and that's what he did. So when he said that, all the Caucasians knew what he was talking about. They knew what he was talking about when he said United Nations has an open seat for African Americans waiting on them to come air their differences and grievances to the international community, where the international community will embrace them. What Negro leader for the past 60 years has addressed that? It's been addressed in the 60s. Malcolm X addressed it. Black Panthers addressed it. It's been mentioned. But who else? Instead of just talking back and forth about a politician from a left side or a right side. That's all they're talking about is local politics presented as though it is national. And Charleston White dropped that. We know. Those who can read know, and those who know. But he said it when they were trying to apply pressure to him, setting him up to be stopped, meaning we're going to take his account again, this Charleston White. Who is he to criticize Charlie Kirk? And Charleston backed them up intellectually. See, people always accuse Caucasians of being violent. It starts mentally first. Caucasians like to break you down mentally and prove, yet you're stupid, just like I said you were. You're stupid, just like I presented you to be. Because, yeah, your parents sent you to school, but this is the limited curriculum at school, and your mama didn't read to you after school. Nobody gave you a book as a gift before. You get free books in this country, and nobody made sure you read enough books to know. They didn't teach you how to teach yourself. That's why when Charleston White was laughing at people saying that boy needs to go to jail, what does Charleston say? 1 out of 3 children will go to prison. That's a statistic. Did you know that that's been updated a little bit better? We've gotten better now. You know what it says now? 1 out of 4. The latest data says 1 out of 4 African-American children, people, males, will have some interaction with the justice system in their lifetime, guaranteed. So all these dudes who keep saying race soldier, race soldier, race soldier, white people, white people, white people, Roman soldier, Roman soldier, Roman soldier, over and over again, all of them. See, and then what they want to do is start a fight as though it's about you and them. No. This is an international game. So you ain't on an international scale. Some of these dudes can't even get out the country because they sell hate speech. Considered to be hate speech was really just limited game. It ain't even about that, but they hit them with some limited game knowledge. They ain't going to do nothing about it. Because, see, once they got enough economics to do something, they still ain't going to do it. They ain't going to write nothing. They ain't going to tell their subscribers and followers, this is what's going on. We need to make a move, because that's when they'll get in trouble. So they just milk the system and make some small money, which is more than our long money. And then that's what they call Negro rich. So when Charleston White said there's a seat of the United Nations awaiting the African American to come in and express his grievances, that's Charleston White extending himself because he was being pressed about Charlie Kirk. So he was like, oh, are you pressing me about Charlie Kirk? But the whole world knows that you always come at me for no reason, something petty, and I ain't did nothing to you. I just said something using free speech. That's the First Amendment. Freedom of speech and expression. That's all I did. This is my act. I am an entertainer, and this is nothing but my character. And it's a characterization. Because he was articulate enough to do that and explain that, Charleston White, they left him alone. They said, all right, you know what? He's smarter than we thought. Now, they knew how smart he was, but when they put you under pressure, everybody does great in scrimmage. I know ball players. Man, they can score 35 points on anybody in practice. Practice is important. When people say practice, what is practice? Practice makes perfect. Oh no, practice is important for morale. See, a lot of dudes put out some stuff about practice wasn't popular and practice wasn't needed. You may not need practice, but in order to motivate your teammates, you show up for practice and work hard, because the best player is usually the dude running the slowest. In the layup line and the drills and stuff, the best player ain't running the hardest. When you look at old tapes of Michael Jordan, he is running faster than he's trying harder as anyone else, and he's the star. He's trying harder. So that if Jordan is running harder, that makes my job easier as a coach, because now I can press these other dudes. You know the coach. If you remember basketball, you watch these 30 for 30 documentaries on ESPN. We watch the DVDs they even have with there's if for anyone who liked the Bulls from the 90s era and they just want to watch some basketball and some scoring, you watch Chicago. You want to see some breaks, and they had a story that Michael Jordan had a fight with Steve Kerr, and the coaches just watch, and that happened all the time in the past. They watch you whoop this dude up because, hey man, he's the captain. You had the captains of the team ran the team because I keep the players in line. That's a leader. So that's why I say we got these people who they talk for us, they collect and sell us products, but they not giving us no game. So we can say, well, what can I do? So Charleston White drops some game. This is what you do. This is how you run your channel. This is what you talk about. He's been known to give out information. It ain't even got to be online. It could be something in the community. This is where you go to get the funding for your nonprofit. He's been saying that for years. For a long time, Charleston White has been dropping that information, and then you'll say, yeah, I did hear that before. You know, the average individual, we heard it. Yeah, that's right. That is true. Yeah, I did. Yeah. He breaks it down. That's what he used to do. But you had to bring the comedy, and he was able to break through the plateau, the threshold that was stopping him, because people don't support you when you bring in information. That's why we say long range comedy game with Charleston White, because he made it where the information was acceptable. Let me give you another example. When you look at this old documentaries make you seem old because you know more than you're supposed to know, because you watch something that's entertaining, but it's also informative. Go back to 1980. When you go back to the rivalry, when you go back to the history of Larry Bird and the emergence of the National Basketball Association with Larry Bird and Magic Johnson. When Magic Johnson came from college, he made passing the ball popular. Because at first it was everybody wanted to score. Scores. Dr. J all through the 70s. It was Dr. J. It was all these people, what's his name? Oscar Robinson, all these all-time greats. And I'm not saying they didn't play team ball, but, until before that, it was maybe in the 1940s, it may have been Bob Cousy, who had passes and around the back passes as a guard. And you did have other guards and players. You had Nate Archibald, a bunch of superstars throughout the 70s and 60s. You had them. So it's not that it was new. But when Magic Johnson, being that he was, 6'9", playing point, he could run the guard, the two, not necessarily he could run the one, but he was really he could run the fast break as a guard, and he would dish the pass. He made it popular to pass. So these other dudes don't want to pass. They don't want to give nobody no shot. They don't want to give nobody no lane where they could get on. And that's the difference of what Charleston White did. So when he got checked and he said, wait a minute, it's checkmate. I got you in check, because he said, America, I'm not your enemy. You let the Chinese, you let all these international powers set right in the country. We've been with y'all forever in this country from the inception and before. And we have always supported and made sure you was all right. When you go back to movies like The Help, these are based on true stories, and people can go back to their great grandmothers. And their grandmothers worked, and they called it day workers, when they used to go out in the day and they would go to Caucasians' houses and clean their houses from top to bottom, and help these Caucasian women who didn't even work and didn't even need to do work, because they could get our parents and grandparents and great grandparents to help them. And that's what we did, and we did it proudly, and we were like an extended family. They would give stuff to people and say, take this home to your children. Y'all can have this extra food. So it's a whole nother history. And this is being done now. We see people from the Caribbean, and we see people doing it, Latinos. So-called black folk did that long time ago. And it's, so it's a whole lot of politics to that too. So the point is, when Charleston White was breaking that down, saying there's a seat waiting at the United Nations. So what does that mean? That seat means that the world recognizes that these people, these so-called American descendants of slavery, are not really recognized and respected and valued internationally in their own country. They're not valued domestically, nationally in the place where they are, but they're not even recognized because the images that are projected about them around the world are negative, and the world sees that. So Charleston confronted them about something that isn't really discussed. It ain't about calling no Caucasians no white supremacists and this and that. That's name calling and bickering. That's weak. What is the real issue? If you're going to say something, be about it, meaning have an intellectual a solution. They ain't got that. Brothers ain't got solutions. So we just throw this out here. We put this in the air because it's really based on that long range comedy game that Charleston White has given. But let us finish it off like this. Let us go here. Why did Charleston White mention the United Nations? That's something he knows about. Where are the origins of that story? The origins of what Charleston White said, the power that Caucasians in positions of power knew when he said that, are based on a presentation called We Charge Genocide. Now, we just get a show ready real quick, and we didn't have it at the extent we would like to do as, extensive research. We don't have that ability because we wanted to do a show real quick and just give you some knowledge and shoot something out, just some conversation. We just kicking it, just having fun, just kick it around. You know what I mean? Because like I said, because Charleston White has opened the door, or we can be a little bit more, informational but educational at the same time. So it was the paper was called. Let me say it from even on the basic scale of Wikipedia, and they do have to document what they say. But let us use them from here. They say We Charge Genocide is a paper accusing the United States government of genocide based on the United Nations Genocide Convention. This paper was written by the Civil Rights Congress, the RC and presented to the United Nations at meetings in Paris in December of 1951. 1951. So that's what Charleston White was dropping. He didn't say it. That was the history of it. Now, as a side note, the Civil Rights Congress was a communist-backed supported organization, so it made it a little shaky. Just like today, when we see the Open Society program and George Soros, everybody now, even on the street level, knows something's up with that. Something's up with these protesters out here. They're being backed and paid by people. People know that on a common level now. They know, here come the supported people against such and such, and they're really communists. They know that now. They know that if they ain't communists, they're still what they call paid agitators. People know that now. Back in the 50s, they didn't know it like that, but the so-called entities of so-called government knew. So let me go further. It says this too. The document pointed out that the United Nations Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide defined genocide as any acts committed with intent to destroy a group in whole or in part. Now, so this organization, they put that out. That was 1951. So, you know, the whole science of that is there's a history to it, and it had been done before. So it wasn't only done once. The United Nations was created in 1945. So this issue was brought up in 1951. And as I said, it was a so-called, the individual who was ahead of this organization. He was from the Caribbean, but he was so-called black, but he was a black Caribbean. He was head of that organization. They had communist ties. But then the situation happened again through the next appeal was from the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, in 1947. And it was more than 100 pages in length. So wait a minute. Let me see. The first one was, wait. Let me read it like this, because this is still more on the background. And I did get, because the first time was 1951. So this couldn't have been first in 1947. It wasn't listed first from the NAACP. But let me read it from the paper to give the way they present it here. Soon after the United Nations was created in 1945, it began to receive requests for assistance from peoples across the world. These came from indigenous peoples of European colonies in Africa and Asia, but also from African Americans. The first group to petition the UN regarding African Americans was the National Negro Congress, which in 1946 delivered a statement on racial discrimination to the Secretary General. The next appeal from the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People was more than 100 pages in length in 1947. So they're saying 47. So as in context, you could go and look this up and see for the exact dates, because here it is. So what they're saying is right here, quote, W.E.B. Du Bois presented it to the UN on the 23rd of October, 1947, over the objections of Eleanor Roosevelt, the widow of the late president, and an American delegate to the UN. Dubois was frustrated with the State Department's opposition to the petitions, criticized President Walter White of the NAACP for accepting a position as consultant to the U.S. delegation. White in turn pushed Dubois out of the NAACP. The petitions were praised by the international press and by black press in the United States. So, as I said, the way they have it here, that the We Charge Genocide was more or less that was the presentation of the paper itself. That was like but the petition, the first petition was looking like 1940. They're saying 47. They're saying the next appeal from National Association of Advancement of Color, NAACP, in 1947 was 100 pages in length. So the point is this: as we look at it and look closer, and we apologize for coming off the cuff with it not being, because I did look at it, but it was some other technicalities that were involved in the dates and times. But the bottom line is the NAACP filed a charge. The other institution that we mentioned, the international publishers, they put that out. They also did a protest. That was the Civil Rights Congress. So the point is, it had been new. So for Charleston White to say that, it wasn't something that had never been thought of and conceived, and Malcolm X spoke about it in the 60s. So as I said, when we hear people talking all the time about the white man this and, Caucasians this, as far as when it comes to being like experts and speaking on white supremacy, we ain't never heard them say nothing about the United Nations. That's the point. Out of all that other rabble and babble I just said just a minute ago, because of the confusion of me trying to pinpoint the dates when these two documents were first charged, what we can say is these dudes doing all this talking ain't never charged nothing, and they didn't collected enough paper to do any of that. And they ain't did a damn move on that. But Charleston White brought that to him. So when he said they waiting on black people to say something, what is that saying? That was just a reflection that all our so-called people who present themselves as leaders or wise people in the community, they know to back up. There's a few people who presented themselves that way and got checked. This just game and conversation that you might hear at the barbershop. Barbershop and babies is in the barbershop because you ain't heard one curse word, and that's the way people used to talk when they be in the barbershop, all age ranges. So now we get isolated and we hear people online and we talk like they're somebody, and they just running game too. But unfortunately, they running game on their own people. They ain't offering nothing of content that you can use. Give me some game I could use that I can make a move with. They ain't even giving you that. But they present themselves as they are international voice on something, and they not. So our problem right here, online time fame, the problem is we don't want to have to point that out, because that ain't what we do. The point is, if you're talking about small individuals, small-mindedness, wouldn't that be us pointing to somebody? If you're talking about average-mindedness, at least there would be some events in the what we're saying about this occurrence right here. But if you're talking about greatness, you're talking about solutions. So when Charleston White even said black people won't even go do that and threw his hands up in the air, but y'all saying that I'm the enemy. But, so that was two different conversations. But when he did mention it, what he was saying is, you keep pressing me, America, over something that shouldn't be pressed about. But if I were to speak globally, which he does have a global voice, everybody who's important heard what he said. So he didn't have to go file no papers nowhere. Just for him to say that, the world knows, man, them Negroes get kicked in their butt every day, but they don't say nothing. They must like it. They must accept that slave role that they're playing. They must accept that treatment, because the ones who speak for them, ain't nobody said, man, get your ass out of here, always trying to sell us some products and collect some paper, but ain't standing tall, 10 foot tall, 10 toes down. That's what they saying. That's what the world is saying. Don't you notice when you travel around, you're walking down the street, whatever city you live in, if they got people from other countries, and they look at you two ways. They look at you like, are you an ignorant Negro, or are you one who knows? They can see it in your eyes which one you are. So they don't hate everybody. They say, oh, that's the stupid ones, and those are the smart ones. Unfortunately, those are the ones who are aware of the world in the international view. And that's the ones who's limited, and they just stuck watching these dumb corporate sponsored news channels that give part of the information. Yeah, that information needs more research. One has to do more reading to get the full story. You're not going to get it in that 1 30-minute hour. We all got family members. When we call them and we go over their house, they say, oh, hold on, man. The news is on. What? The news? Yeah. Hold on. Just let me finish watching this. Not saying that the news doesn't give a general view of what's going on, but when they're done watching that CNN article, that CNN episode, they talk to us like they were inside some joint chief of staff meeting in Washington, D.C. That's how they talking, like they right in the middle of real conversation. They halting us like, hold on, brother. Man, the news is on. You're going to have to wait for a minute. Let me finish watching this program. Like they're in a meeting with international figures getting the full truth of what's going on. And that's what makes the USA a genius nation, because they're genius enough to recognize everybody ain't interested in knowing what they need to know. They ain't interested. Don't act interested. Don't say, man, these Caucasians, man, it's their fault. But this individual won't even educate themselves to meet them halfway. So when Charleston White got pressed, He was intelligent enough to say, hold on, white people. I'm not your problem. Black people are not your problem. I, meaning black people, is what he was saying. The Chinese are your problem. Everybody knows how many properties and how many benefits Chinese people get. Forget them tariffs. They already in the country. They already investing. Why, they already coming. They already letting different Asian companies come here and build companies. These ain't, at one time, if you're talking about up until the 1950s, there couldn't be no other countries in the U.S. because they was considered what? Commies. They used to call them that. Man, these commies, and they had other words they would use for any so-called foreigner. It wasn't nobody in the U.S. except Caucasians, American descendants of slavery, and a few Asians. It was a few, and they had a name for them too. So, so that, and then later on, there became some, they used to call them Puerto Ricans. Oh, here's some Puerto Ricans. That was East Coast. Because then if it was the West Coast, it was a couple Mexicans. That's all it was in the U.S. It wasn't all of these groups. And then when you see these groups, they're the first ones to get on the media and talk as though they've been here long enough to know what they're talking about. And they don't. It sounds good. And they got supporters because people want to have that knowledge that they're talking. We don't even want to talk politics like that. All we talking about is long range game. And that was the long range comedy game that Charleston White pointed out. So as I said, he checked a few people when they try to talk to him, and he said, "Man, you ain't even got nothing going on outside of the social media. You ain't got no products. You ain't got no shirt." He slapped him up real bad. He pulled his belt off his pants. Belt fell down a couple inches, and he spanked him. And he spanked him figuratively and literally and told him, you ain't got nothing else going on, and you just trying to get into a beef with me so you can get your ad revenue from your Google AdSense, from your monetization. That's why you want me to argue with you, so you can get some views up and you can get your check to pay you a little bit of money. And he laughed. It was, so if you're talking about jokes of Charleston White, it was sadly funny because it was accurate. And ain't nothing wrong with being and getting AdSense, and it ain't nothing wrong. But Charleston White was already showing people how to do other things. And these were people who didn't have the intelligence, and they didn't have the foresight to do other moves because they hadn't been pressed to do that. They let them comfortably get their check, and then they didn't have to do nothing else. And they talk like they were CNN, and they were educating us, and we were glad to be able to hear them. These people became arrogant because the largest room in the world is the room for improvement, as one would say. So they didn't keep improving and getting bigger and getting smarter. Charleston White didn't stay where he was. When you watch interviews from back, he reads, he has read, he has been homeschooled. So because when he had his injuries and his physical injuries as a child, he had to read. He was in institutions the same way these people was in penitentiaries as an adult. Those who have been institutionalized have children. As children, often have different views of institutionalization. He's been institutionalized already. So he's like, oh man, I don't want to keep coming back to no penitentiary. A lot of dudes didn't really get in trouble until when they got into the upper years of teens, when they went into when they hit 13, 14, 15, that just became a continuation of the penitentiary, and they were institutionalized early as well. But a lot of people give that the most credit. Charleston White said, nah, that ain't getting the most credit. You dudes is killing your own people. At least, y'all run up on your own people. See, so that's where they got embarrassed and shut down. Because they bragging about what they did to a dude in their neighborhood who looked just like them because of what? Dysfunctional teaching and a lower self-esteem. And then an institutional mechanism that was put in place to make that available, that they had to only rise above and supersede that thought. They couldn't rise above their own level of thinking. So when Charleston White checked them on that was the rap. That was it. That's when the legend began, because he became who he became, checking gangbangers. He talks about it and explains it on every show that one asks. So the point is, when it became the United Nations, here's another example. Check this out. This same Wikipedia article says, on 17th of December, 1951, the petition, meaning the petition we've been talking about, called We Charge Genocide. That's what this is about. It was a paper accusing the United States government of genocide based on the UN Genocide Convention. The delivery from Paul Robeson, there was two different deliveries. It was October 17th, December 5th, 1951. The petition was presented to the United Nations by two separate venues. Paul Robeson, concert singer and activist, together with people who signed the petition, handed the document to a United Nations official in New York City, while William L. Patterson, executive director of the Civil Rights Congress, delivered copies of the petition to a United Nations delegation in Paris. W.E.B. Du Bois, also slated to deliver the petition in Paris, had been classified by the U.S. State Department as an unregistered foreign agent and was deterred from traveling. Du Bois had previously had an expensive legal battle against the Justice Department. Now, the point is, these dudes we hear talking online, boom, 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 these dudes is back in the 50s having international dealings. These cats ain't got no international dealings. They talking a big talk and they talking white supremacy, but don't they in the same breath say white supremacy was an international institution? Don't they say that? But then they want to, now it can be broken into national. But what I'm saying is if these dudes back then in the 50s, and they weren't from the 50s, they were adults then. So they were much older, even in 1950. They was the same age as these dudes we hear online talking like they just some high level intellectuals, meaning like they lead, but they claim they ain't leaders. But they ain't leading nowhere, so you don't see no leading happening. Charleston White brought long range game to say at least have your mind free of what they running. Because as long as they running that game, you can only go so high because they don't want that much. They got a little car, a little jewelry, and they happy. They little house for themselves, but they can't multiply and make everybody else get some paper. They don't see that's what you go by. Do somebody not share information where you can also get money? No, they just want you to be in their circle and contribute to their lifestyle. And that's a hater. That's a hater. They don't have it. And it's a lot of people like that. No disrespect, because people do what they have the capabilities to do. But what happened in this country is those who had higher capabilities to help others, to turn water into wine, to feed the multitudes, those are the ones who started getting stopped. So we ain't even talking about the Civil Rights Act. We ain't talking about the assassinations of the 50s and 60s. We ain't even talking about that. We just talking about the everyday moving and shaking. That's what dudes ain't doing because they really player hating. They player hate. They don't want to see nobody else get no money beyond what they're getting. And then people are saying, what are you talking about? And they don't get it. It don't matter if they get it because the information was given. See, once Caucasians see that the information is given and nobody took that information and said nothing about it or addressed it or actually acted upon it, that's when they say, man, them dudes are stupid. So when Charleston White put the information in the air and mentioned the United Nations, that was a call to action, meaning those who are presently in those positions, showing that the wool was pulled from beneath their over their heads. They were never doing nothing in the first place. They've been talking a good game for 60 years and never had done nothing. That's all that said. They never had done anything but talked as though they were educated. So how does this Charleston White come out of nowhere when confronted? Because he didn't bother nobody. But when they pressed him as though he was an enemy of the state, he said, I'm not your enemy. That's what once one is deemed enemy of the state, other problems can happen. See, and that problem is what? The National Defense Authorization Act signed by Barack Obama. Yeah. Look that up. So that's what can happen. So when the action was taken against Charleston, he said, wait a minute, I'm not your. So people don't even see the intricacies of what was happening when he's getting charged. See, they don't even see it because it's game. They don't have that level of game. They talk back and forth. Yeah. And they go back and forth and talk about each other and say he's a clown and look what he did. That's small game. That's not long range. That's small. That's short term. See, one time, the MC Ice-T was making an analogy, and he said, "Yeah, some of you dudes, y'all got to stay close to the porch. Y'all can't go too far off the hook. Don't stray too far off that front porch. You can't go long range. You can't get into the world. Your mind don't expand beyond that." That's what he was saying. So a lot of dudes, they ain't long range. You got short level local liars. And then you got dudes with long range game. They can go all around the world and they can represent. And that's what Charleston White was saying. You see me here, I'm talking, but he's easily coast to coast. He's easily, Frisco to Maine, as they would say in the street game. He's easily that, just from conversation. He can build conversation because we have fun with conversation. That's why you have poetry, you have rhyming. We just be talking. The Black Panther Party was attacked, but they was just talking. And I'm not saying they didn't have mobilization ideas. They was 20-something years old. They wasn't trying to overthrow the suit. You know, they was talking about it, but that was just them, as I mentioned in the previous episode. That's how one does on a college campus. They talk that talk. And they are moving, they making moves. But they had people more afraid than what they was actually going to do, because they could work with people. They like, you're not going to violate me and I'm just going to sit there and accept it. That was a new thought process coming from so-called Negroes at that time. So-called, what they started saying, we ain't even Negroes no more. We Black Americans, this Black Power movement. So everything was a shock. It was like hearing a rap record. It was like hearing Charleston White. But in a political context, Charleston White is in a communication context, but he's more like he's transitioned to entertainment. He's transitioned to literature, communication. You know, like we like to hear the oral tradition, what they call speakers and orators.